I love this anime called Detective Conan, which I've been watching since I was a child. It's been on for decades, and it follows a teenage boy who is then shrunk into the body of a second grader, and he solves murder mysteries. I love this show so much. I watch it every single day. I'm Keiko Green, and I'm the playwright of Nuclear. So, Nuclear started as a commission from Manhattan Theater Club and the Sloan Foundation. And the Sloan Foundation specializes in plays that have to do with science. My dad is a retired nuclear engineer. And so I thought there's something in there that I really wanted to get to the bottom of. And for him, I was really interested in he thought and still thinks that this is a hugely, an incredible energy source that has so much possibility. I don't know how people think about nuclear power. It's been kind of declining. And so I'm really interested in exploring legacy, both in this man who focused his entire life on nuclear power and also the legacy of nuclear power itself. So the play Nuclear is about Ray, who is a kind of rock star nuclear engineer, and his building tension with a woman named Hana, who kind of represents the young perspective. And two of them really go at it as they kind of discover the legacy of our entire industry. And like nuclear power, there are many, many chain reactions that kind of blow up and up and up. I would say two images would be kind of connected. One is like a really, really lively international office with people speaking a million languages. And then the second image would be later that night, two people in the same office in the dark having like a glass of whiskey. And then the third image would be Homer Simpson. So each play is kind of different. Overall, I'm a person that really tries not to overthink a first draft. That's why my revisions are quite hellish. But my first drafts are messy and, kind of horrible. And I just embrace that as part of the process. I think what is helpful to me is knowing something I'm writing towards near the end. And then I just start writing scenes. This might happen, maybe this happens. And the scenes are often not in order necessarily. And kind of by puzzle piecing them together, that becomes like the first rough draft for myself. And then I smooth it out, and that becomes the first draft that I share with other people. But it's a messy process. I don't know if a play it should be, quote, ready for a reading ever. I think there's such a joy in sharing something that's a little bit too raw and inviting an audience into something that is not ready. When I feel like a play is ready, I actually am just like, yeah, let's try to move this towards production. But for me, the joy of readings is that we get to really test stuff out. And hopefully by the end of that week, by throwing something in front of the reading, there's a product that we're actually trying to get to, which is this public facing reading. There's something about that I think somehow will force the play to become reading ready, but I don't think that it should start the week like that necessarily. Sometimes audiences will try to give you notes, and that is probably less helpful than they think that is. But I do think finding out where an audience stops rooting for a character when an audience is obviously, if they're unclear about a plot point, that's very helpful to learn so we can clarify that. But I think audiences are really savvy when it comes to emotional arc and emotional intelligence. And so when they sense that something that a character does feels out of character, that is something that I really pick up on. And sometimes that doesn't even happen with some of the best feedback isn't necessarily said to me in words. It's more observing kind of how the audience is taking in the story that's unfolding before them. And you can kind of feel the energy in the space. It's one of my favorite parts of live theater. When I start to get a little stuck in a play, I mean, people say when you're stuck, you have to go back. I think it's Jose Rivera said this, you have to go back to the beginning of your play and read through it and just find out where you started lying, because it just means you lied somewhere along the way. I love that. I often will pinpoint that moment of everything up until this moment actually made sense. And it's this part that started, everything started falling apart. once I have that moment, I can kind of wander around. I don't force myself to write, actually. I really decide, oh, I'm going to take a walk, I'm going to do the dishes. I think it's better sometimes to just like let your body do something else and like, because your brain is still going to be thinking about this problem you're having. I also use my husband a lot. I'll burst into his office and just say like, okay, I have to tell you everything. So, okay, so in this part of the play, and I just kind of monologue at him. And sometimes he helps. Sometimes me just monologuing at him answers the questions that I have myself. But I will say he should probably get a co-writing credit on everything I write. Something I've been really interested in this play with Ray and Hana is just kind of our preconceived notions of each other. Ray is a lot based on my dad, though not exactly. And there's this assumption my dad is this white male nuclear engineer who's retired, and he worked internationally, but he wasn't really interested in foreign food. He has a really limited palate. He grew up really poor, so it's just part of it. And I was really kind of amazed by how there is an idea that, people are culturally closed-minded because they are unable to indulge in certain foods, or, they have preferences, or they just like don't speak the language. They don't have an ear for language. But really, I saw within that my dad getting to know all of these international people in his office on a personal level that wasn't just based on their culture. And there's something about that really sparked an interest for me in what it means to be an older man in a kind of like older industry at this point. And the preconcept, a little bit, I'm trying to I think with the character of Hana, I'm going to be calling myself out on my ideas of like what it means to be a good citizen, and how that's actually closed-minded in its own way. And I think it'll be really interesting to get these two characters in conversation with each other as they are kind of figuring out what is the future, both for us personally, in our relationship, and also in this nuclear power industry. Even no matter how many times I think I'm going to write a drama, they always end up so funny. I think that, for me, I'm a person that some people like to earn their comedy moments, or like they use comedy really sparingly. I like to earn my dramatic moments. So almost every play ends up being mostly comedic and then leaning into something that becomes a little bit more dramatic. I think what makes a play naturally funny and like easy to write for me is that characters are trying their best and they are lying, sometimes to themselves. I think that whenever we have characters that say everything that's on their mind and they mean everything really earnestly, to me that becomes a kind of boring play. What I love is people who don't have the right words, or they don't even know what they're thinking yet, and they're just like spewing words out without hoping they'll get to the bottom of something. I think watching people like trying and failing to be able to communicate with each other inherently becomes really funny. And despite this being a play about nuclear engineers, it's also the comedy about office culture. So I think those two things that feel, I don't know, tonally really different actually merge together to create something that's both weighty and fascinating and really, really funny. I hope that audiences leave thinking about their own version of like, what is something that I have invested my life in that I thought was the whole world, that I thought was my whole future, and how have I navigated those moments where, something that was my whole world came crashing down, or something that I've like used to identify who I am as a person suddenly becomes insignificant. And I think always the hope is that people walk away with seeing a part of themselves in a play, but also I think that they are going out with with a greater sense of empathy towards all the people around them. The most Keiko thing you could find in my writing space is probably my basset hound, who likes to be lying like, if preferably like on my keyboard of my laptop as I'm trying to write. I love to have multiple beverages. Like I'll have a water and a coffee and juice, and they're, by the end I'm like taking all of these dishes back to the sink, and that's when I know I've had a really good day of writing. I love this anime called Detective Conan, which I've been watching since I was a child. It's been on for decades, and it follows a teenage boy who is then shrunk into the body of a second grader, and he solves murder mysteries. I love this show so much. I watch it every single day. I watched every episode. Whenever I catch up, I just restart the entire series again. But I also really enjoy, I don't actually enjoy this, but I found running. I started running recently and it's been really helpful. I started just because I wanted to like build endurance in a rehearsal process. Because I mentally actually, using your brain as a writer throughout a whole rehearsal day is really exhausting. And I found that physically getting a little bit stronger really helps with my capacity to kind of mentally stay engaged too. I'm trying to work my way up to like a half marathon length, but right now I'm only at like my 10K, but I'm gonna get there. This is the most Japanese answer ever, but I just love a bathtub. I do so much reading in the bathtub. When I was working more as an actor, I would take scripts in and read the entire script out loud in a British accent, no matter where the play was set. And for some reason, like doing the whole play in a British accent helped me memorize lines. But even now, I love reading books in the bathtub. I can stay in there for hours. My favorite little snack is these like snack pickled plums. They're so sour and so salty, and everyone kind of like thinks I'm crazy for eating these as a snack all the time. But like the salty and sour really wakes me up, and I feel like it gives my mind like a huge boost in the middle of a writing session. I am coming up near the end of my reading of House of Leaves, which is, if for people that know, a horror novel that is really structurally wild. You start reading the book and it just reads like a scientific like essay about a movie that doesn't exist. There's like the story that's happening in there, and then there's a secondary story of this guy who's like editing this thing together. So he's having his own like meltdown and break from reality just in the footnotes of the book. And then there's certain parts in the book where you're like the contents of or the structure of the book mimics the content of the book, where it's like this house is ever changing and evolving, and so the book does too. So sometimes there are like moments where I was reading this in the airplane and like turning the book upside down to read a certain part, and I was like, oh man, all these people in this plane think I'm illiterate. But but there is something really cool about I don't know if I've ever read a book that kind of number one really showed me that like it has to be a book. I just don't think it would be as successful in any other medium. And I love seeing things that just are like thriving in the medium that they're in, but also something that was like so immersive in a medium that I'd never really experienced like that before. And that's been really, really inspiring to me. I would say don't be afraid of sharing your horrible first draft. I think that people get too bent up about, oh, I have to like make sure the punctuation is perfect, and and it's actually way better to just get it out there and start getting, theater is a collaborative medium. So the earlier we can get it out there, the faster you can get collaborators on board, and we can start going through the thing, and they're going to help you write your play, really. Having actors figure out, oh, this part and this character's arc doesn't make sense to me based on this thing that he said in the first scene. It starts to tell you like where you're losing track of your characters. And honestly, your characters and your relationship, people love a plot, but they really fall in love with your play because of your characters and their relationships to each other. And so I think that, yeah, the earlier you can get people on board, you're really setting yourself up for success. I think that we're in a place in the theater world right now where I think with a lot of activism that was happening in the last few years, there's a lot of black and white. Messages are really black and white. And I hope and think that we're moving towards a place where we're really exploring the morally gray. I think that anytime writers and directors and actors choose to instead lecture about the things that they feel, and our theater becomes more of a TED Talk versus us exploring our own flaws, really calling ourselves out, that's when you know that you're going to be connecting with other people who are noticing the same behavior in themselves. And it means that like we're never just putting up theater to judge other people. We're actually putting up theater to explore something complex within ourselves. And I think that the moment you do that, audience members are gonna see that too, and hopefully we're moving the art form forward rather than just kind of sticking around in a stasis. So please come be a part of the very first reading of Nuclear at Chance Theater on October 22nd.